The morning fog over Pearl Harbor hung low like a gray veil, dampening sound and swallowing details. Corporal Mason Reed adjusted his uniform collar and rubbed the back of his neck nervously. He had been stationed at the naval base for less than 6 months, and though he had earned the respect of his peers, he still felt like a rookie in the shadow of history. The echoes of battles long past lingered here, etched into the concrete, the rusted rails, the monuments to men who had fallen decades before. Mason always felt the weight of it, but today he tried to shake it off with something lighter, a joke. He noticed her immediately. A woman standing alone by the main gate, dressed in civilian clothes that clashed with the rigid military precision surrounding her. Her posture was impeccable, her hands clasped behind her back, shoulders squared, chin level. She wasn't someone who looked lost or confused. She looked deliberate, focused, dangerous maybe, in a way Mason couldn't immediately place. "Who is that?" he muttered to himself, stepping closer for a better look. Her hair was tied back tightly, dark and glossy, with not a strand out of place. Her eyes scanned the horizon as if she could see through the fog, past the gate, past the base, and into some invisible danger only she could perceive. Mason squinted. Something about her presence unnerved him and secretly intrigued him. "Ma'am," he called, louder than he intended, trying to sound casual. "What's your rank?" It was a joke, of course. He meant to lighten the mood for himself, a way to mask the nervous flutter in his stomach. Maybe she was just a visiting official or a contractor. His lips twitched into a smirk. If she laughed, he could breathe easy. But when her head turned, the fog seemed to grow heavier. Her gaze pinned him in place, unnervingly calm, and that smirk he expected to see never came. Mason realized the joke had landed somewhere other than humor. He shifted his weight, suddenly aware of the guards lining the gate behind him. Their expressions were unreadable, but their stance was sharp, almost stiff, like soldiers waiting for a command they already knew. And then he heard the sound, steps, heavy, synchronized, approaching fast. He looked back and saw 3 figures emerging from the mist, each moving with a deliberate authority that immediately commanded attention. They were wearing the dress blues of Admirals, their medals glinting in the sparse light that cut through the fog. Mason's stomach dropped. His smirk faded into confusion. He had never seen that many high-ranking officers in one place without a reason. And then they did something he would never forget. They saluted her. The woman returned the salute with effortless precision, her movements almost ceremonial, fluid, as though she had done this 1,000 times before. Mason stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the curb. His voice caught in his throat. "Wah, what just?" "Corporal," a voice behind him said. It was his sergeant, sharp and abrupt. "Step aside." Mason turned and found himself suddenly aware of how exposed he looked, standing there in front of one of the most mysterious figures he had ever seen. The sergeant's eyes darted nervously between Mason and the woman, and Mason noticed for the first time the tension in the air, the kind that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. This wasn't a routine visit. This wasn't a civilian contractor or a visiting diplomat. Something about her radiated authority, so potent it seemed to bend reality around her. The fog swirled as the Admirals continued walking, flanking her like shadows given form. Mason couldn't take his eyes off her. She wasn't imposing in a brute sense, she didn't need to be, but there was an undeniable presence, a weight to her that demanded recognition. It wasn't just her posture or the way she moved or even the way the Admirals reacted to her. It was something intangible, something primal. As she passed Mason, she finally spoke. Her voice was calm, measured, almost soft, but there was a steel hidden beneath it that could cut through stone. "You must be new here," she said. No hint of humor, no acknowledgement of his attempt at a joke, just observation. "Yes, ma'am," Mason replied, though he wasn't entirely sure she had meant to call him that. He cleared his throat. "Corporal Mason Reed, sir." I mean, ma'am." He swallowed hard. His mouth suddenly felt dry, his tongue thick. Her gaze lingered on him for a fraction longer than felt natural. Mason thought he saw the faintest trace of a smile, but it was gone before he could be certain. The fog seemed to press closer, muffling sounds, drawing attention to the distant horns of a ship and the soft, rhythmic crunch of boots on asphalt. Then the sudden blare of an alarm shattered the morning calm. Red lights began to flash across the base. Sirens screamed. Mason's heart jumped into his throat. People were running, guards, officers, and even some of the civilians scurrying for cover. The Admirals stiffened. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't break stride. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the direction of the sirens with a precision Mason had only seen in movies, sharp, focused, predatory. She didn't move like someone reacting for the first time. She moved like someone who had anticipated this exact moment, down to the second. Mason wanted to ask what was happening, wanted to follow her, but he found himself rooted to the spot. Something about her presence made him feel both incredibly small and painfully aware of every detail around him. As she passed through the gate, the mist seemed to part for her. The fog, the early morning light, the chaos of the base, it all became secondary, background to her figure. Mason realized with a shock that he wasn't looking at just a high-ranking officer. He was looking at someone whose history, whose experience, whose very life had created ripples that touched everyone in this room without them realizing it. The last thing Mason heard before she disappeared into the depths of the base was the faint, almost imperceptible murmur of the Admirals. They were speaking among themselves, but the words carried weight. He caught a fragment. Her, only she can, and then silence. Mason's stomach twisted. He didn't understand what he had just witnessed, but he knew with an eerie certainty that the morning would never feel normal again. That casual joke about rank had been a mistake, one that made him painfully aware of how little he actually knew about the world around him, about the people he served with, about the woman who had just passed him by like a ghost through the fog. And as the alarm continued to blare, as the base erupted into movement and orders, Mason realized one undeniable truth. Some people carried authority that wasn't measured in stripes or medals. Some people demanded respect simply by existing. And some of those people were far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. End of Part 1. Suspense, tension, and curiosity fully established. Mason Reed could barely catch his breath as he watched her stride away through the fog. Every instinct in his body screamed that he should follow, that he should at least try to understand who this woman was, but the tight knot of apprehension in his chest froze him in place. He had joked once carelessly about her rank, and now he was trapped in a moment that felt far larger than him. Every step she took seemed to leave an invisible imprint on the base itself, bending the chaos of alarms and shouting officers around her. Her name, he would later learn, was Elena Hartwell, though at that moment he didn't know it. He only knew the sudden hush that fell over the nearest Admirals as she walked past them. Mason had never seen men of such power, the ones who commanded entire fleets, show such deference. They didn't whisper to her, they didn't question her. They simply moved aside, saluted, and let her pass. Something deep inside Mason stirred. Whoever she wasn't just someone important. She was untouchable, yet terrifyingly alive. He followed at a safe distance, ducking behind pillars and stairwells, trying to keep her in view without drawing attention. He noticed how she didn't glance at the running, panicked personnel, didn't react to the sirens blaring across the base. She moved with calm purpose, her steps measured and precise. Every eye that met her seemed to falter, every officer in her path hesitated, unsure whether to stop or keep moving. Mason's curiosity flared. Who is she? Why is no one stopping her? Finally, she disappeared inside the main Command HQ building. Mason paused, considering whether he should risk going inside after her. The sergeant's voice echoed in his memory. You shouldn't joke with her. At first, it had sounded like just a warning about etiquette or military hierarchy. Now, Mason understood it might have been much more literal. He crept along the perimeter, waiting for a window or an open door to give him a glimpse. Through the glass, he could see the Admirals escorting her down a long corridor lined with digital maps and screens blinking with red and green dots, lines connecting one point of interest to another. She walked without hesitation, stopping occasionally to glance at a display, as if she already knew exactly what she was looking for. Mason noticed the way the lights reflected in her eyes, sharp, calculating, almost predatory. A junior officer, who looked barely out of his 20s, approached one of the admirals nervously. Mason strained to hear the conversation. "Sir, who is she?" the young officer asked, voice low, almost trembling. The admiral didn't meet the officer's eyes. "You wouldn't understand. Just make sure nothing interferes with her access." Mason felt a shiver crawl up his spine. Whatever she was here for, it was classified, and more importantly, it was dangerous. Then, almost without warning, a group of communications officers burst into the room, shouting over the sirens still wailing outside. Mason's heart thudded in sync with the alarms. He had never seen anything like this before. It wasn't just routine training or a test. Something real, urgent, and potentially catastrophic was happening. Yet Alina remained composed. She barely moved her head as she scanned the room, her calm standing in stark contrast to the frenzy around her. "Corporal," a voice cut through his thoughts. Mason turned to see his sergeant marching toward him, a frown etched deep into his face. "What the hell are you doing here? This area is restricted." I was just," Mason's words faltered. "I mean, he pointed toward Alina, but his hand trembled." His sergeant's eyes narrowed, catching the faintest tremor in Mason's voice. "You don't know her, do you?" Mason shook his head. "That's exactly why you stay out of it," the sergeant said grimly. "You don't know what she's capable of. No one does. And that's why joking with her is the dumbest thing you've done in your life." Mason swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how small he felt, how ignorant. He had always taken pride in his service, his knowledge of protocol, his understanding of chain of command. But compared to this woman, all of it felt meaningless. Inside, Alina had stopped in front of a massive digital map displaying the Pacific. Tiny red blips moved across the screen, their paths intersecting with thin, flickering lines. She tapped one of the blips, and the screen zoomed in on a vessel traveling at unusual speeds, unregistered, untraceable, something Mason couldn't even begin to comprehend. The admirals hovered near her, glancing at one another with expressions that ranged from concern to disbelief. One whispered to the other, barely audible, and Mason caught fragments. "Her last operation. Thought she'd retired. How is she back?" Alina didn't respond, but her eyes flicked to them, and for a moment Mason thought he saw a flicker of weariness, a memory that weighed heavy. But it was gone almost immediately, replaced with the icy focus of someone prepared to do exactly what needed to be done. Mason's curiosity became almost unbearable. He edged closer to the building, straining to see the screens, the commands, the interactions. One of the admirals suddenly leaned in toward her and said, quietly but firmly, "Ma'am, we're out of options. If this escalates—" Alina's response was barely a whisper, but it carried across the room. "Then we finish it ourselves." The words hit Mason like a punch. He didn't understand the scope of the situation, but he felt the weight of it. He could see the tension ripple across the faces of everyone in the room. The admirals straightened, some paled slightly. One of them muttered under his breath, "She knows exactly what she's walking into." And Mason realized something terrifying. She wasn't just a Marine or an officer or even someone of incredible rank. She was a force of nature, and the respect the admirals had shown her, so complete, so automatic, wasn't ceremonial. It was survival. As the group moved deeper into the command center, Mason noticed a side door slightly ajar. He could see her silhouette as she paused in front of another screen, her hand brushing over a keyboard, her eyes narrowing at a string of encrypted data. Mason leaned closer, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He had no clearance, no business being here, and yet something compelled him forward. "Corporal," his sergeant's voice snapped him back to reality. "Step away, now." Mason hesitated, torn between the urge to obey and the impossible pull of curiosity. His sergeant grabbed him by the shoulder, firm and urgent. You don't know what she's dealing with. Nothing good ever comes from trying to follow her." Mason's gaze flicked back to Alina one last time. She didn't notice him. She was already calculating, already planning, already 2 steps ahead of everyone else. The calm authority she radiated made Mason feel both insignificant and alive at the same time. He knew, without question, that whatever was about to unfold would change everything: his career, his understanding of the military, and perhaps even his life. And then, almost imperceptibly, she glanced at him. Mason froze. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and he felt it, a flicker of recognition or maybe assessment. She didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't say a word, but that single look carried an unspoken message: stay out of my way for now. The alarm continued to blare, red lights bathed the room in a frantic glow, and officers rushed past them with papers and devices, shouting into radios and to each other. Mason's heart raced. He knew one thing with absolute certainty: this woman was no visitor, no ceremonial officer, no simple commander. She was something else entirely. And he was about to witness it firsthand. Mason Reed trailed at a safe distance, ducking behind corridors and control panels, every nerve in his body alert. The adrenaline from the morning's encounter still pulsed through him, making his fingers tingle and his heart pound. He had to see this through. Who was Alina Hartwell? And why had 3 admirals saluted her as if she were the embodiment of authority itself? The questions burned in his mind like fire across dry grass. But as he followed, Mason realized the danger wasn't just in the mystery surrounding her. It was in the reactions of those around her. Everyone in the command center treated her with a mix of awe, fear, and deference. Officers who usually carried themselves with the confidence born of rank and experience now hesitated when she passed. The room felt smaller in her presence, as if her authority was a physical force pushing everyone toward order and obedience. Mason wondered if that was why his sergeant had been so insistent, because a single misstep around her could have consequences beyond understanding. Finally, Mason found himself outside a restricted area marked Top Secret, Eyes Only. The door was slightly ajar. He could see shadows moving within, flickering on the walls as if painted by the pale blue glow of monitors. He knew he shouldn't go any closer. He wasn't cleared for this area, and yet some force inside him demanded he see more. He leaned forward, peering through the crack. Inside, Alina stood before a massive holographic display, her silhouette outlined against a sea of glowing maps, data streams, and red blips moving in intricate patterns. Her hands moved with fluid precision, tapping and swiping, drawing invisible lines and connecting points Mason couldn't begin to understand. The admirals hovered nearby, exchanging hushed words, their faces pale. "You're sure this is the same pattern?" one of them whispered. Alina didn't respond immediately. Her eyes never left the screen. "It is, and it's escalated faster than predicted." Mason's stomach knotted. Pattern. Escalated. He had no idea what they were talking about, but the intensity in her voice made it clear that this was far more serious than anything he had imagined that morning. A junior officer, probably not older than Mason himself, shuffled in nervously, holding a tablet like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Ma'am, sir, we've got unidentified vessels entering restricted waters. All conventional tracking systems failed. Initial reports suggest they've been retrofitted for unconventional operations." Alina's eyes narrowed. She leaned closer to the holographic map, scanning, analyzing. Unconventional operations barely captured what she saw, her lips pressed together, a faint crease forming in her brow. Mason noticed a subtle change in her demeanor, a shift from composed authority to something sharper, more dangerous. The admirals exchanged glances. One of them muttered, "We thought she retired. Why is she back now?" Alina finally spoke, her voice low and controlled, yet carrying the weight of someone who had stared danger in the face more times than she could count. "Because the threat didn't retire, and neither do I." Mason's curiosity burned. Retired? Threat? He had no idea who she really was, but he knew instinctively that she had faced horrors beyond the imagination of anyone in this room, and somehow she was the only one equipped to deal with it. Suddenly, a loud buzzer rang, snapping Mason's attention to the main entrance. He spun around, only to find his sergeant storming toward him. "Corporal, what the hell are you doing here?" Mason stumbled back, caught off guard. I was Just what? Following her," the sergeant snapped, eyes flashing with a mix of fear and fury. "You cannot be here. You have no idea what she's capable of. And trust me, you don't want to find out." Mason swallowed hard. The sergeant's tone wasn't just scolding, it carried a warning, almost like a prayer. She's just a woman," Mason said weakly, trying to rationalize what he had seen. His sergeant's gaze pierced him. "No, Mason, she's not just a woman. Well, you'll see soon enough if you survive long enough to understand. For now, step back. Stay out of the shadows, stay alive." Mason's mind reeled. This was no ordinary officer. This was someone whose presence alone altered the rules of the environment. Someone whose very history was classified. Someone whose identity carried weight the entire base acknowledged silently. And he had made a joke. As he watched from a hidden corner, Alina's hands danced across the holographic display, drawing connections faster than anyone could process. Lines of red and blue blipped across the map, tracking vessels, plotting trajectories, predicting movements. Mason realized he could never hope to understand what she was doing, but he could feel the intensity of it, the razor-sharp precision that had probably saved countless lives before today. A monitor suddenly beeped, drawing her attention. She leaned closer, scrutinizing a string of encrypted data. Her eyes flicked across it like she was reading a language only she could understand. Mason caught a phrase flashing across the screen: Archangel Initiative. The words sent a chill down his spine. Archangel. It sounded more like a code name for a secret operation than a rank or a vessel, and somehow Mason knew it was connected to her. The room seemed to shrink around her, the tension building to a palpable weight. One of the admirals muttered, almost to himself, "She's the only one who can stop this." Mason's stomach twisted. Stop what? The words hung in the air like smoke, barely comprehensible, but they made one thing clear. Alina Hartwell was no ordinary Marine. She was a force unleashed only in the gravest of circumstances. And whatever she was facing, it had been planned, anticipated, and feared by the highest-ranking officials in the Navy. Alina turned suddenly, her gaze sweeping the room, scanning the holographic displays, the officers, the admirals' expressions. Mason felt almost instinctively that she was evaluating him, too. Though he was hidden, her eyes seemed to sense everything, as if she could detect the presence of every person in the room. He froze, heart hammering, aware that he was entirely exposed yet invisible to everyone else. Then almost casually she spoke to the admirals. "Prepare a team, full operational authority, immediate deployment, no exceptions." The room went silent. One of the admirals swallowed hard. "Ma'am, are you certain? Protocol requires." "I am certain," Alina interrupted, her voice calm but final, leaving no room for argument. "Every second counts. There isn't time for hesitation. Do it now." Mason's chest tightened. He had seen orders barked before, but never with this intensity, this absolute authority. No one questioned her, no one hesitated. They obeyed instantly, as if her words carried the weight of destiny itself. A junior officer approached, hesitant. "Ma'am, will we need additional clearance?" Alina looked at him, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "You already have clearance. If you're not ready, step aside. Otherwise, move." Mason realized something then. The woman he had jokingly asked about rank was a legend. Not just a legend in whispers or classified files, but a living, breathing force whose very existence demanded respect. The power in that room was not just her authority. It was her experience, her skill, and her history. And for a fleeting moment, Mason understood why his sergeant had been so insistent. Some shadows in the military are too deep, too dangerous, and too classified to interfere with. Some people don't just command respect, they embody it. And Alina Hartwell was one of those people. As alarms continued to blare, Mason felt a mixture of awe and fear. He had been exposed to a force larger than himself, and he could sense that the coming hours would test not only the military's limits but his own. He had entered her world unknowingly, and there was no turning back. Alina turned back to the holographic display, tapping keys with calm precision. Mason watched her, captivated, as the full weight of her presence sank in. He realized he wasn't just observing a Marine or a commander. He was witnessing someone who had survived battles no one else could imagine, someone whose return to action would shape events in ways few could anticipate. And he understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever she was about to do, it would not just change the course of the mission. It would change the course of his understanding of courage, power, and the very definition of rank. End of Part 3. Tension heightens, classified stakes revealed, and Alina's legendary status is solidified. Mason Reed's mind raced as he followed the ebb and flow of activity in the command center from a distance. Every step he took felt like walking on the edge of a knife. Alina Hartwell moved with a precision and authority that defied comprehension, and every officer she passed seemed to recoil subtly, as if acknowledging her presence with silent deference. Mason had spent years studying military protocol, hierarchy, and discipline, but this was something else entirely. He had no framework to understand it. His curiosity gnawed at him relentlessly. He had to know more, had to understand why the woman he had jokingly questioned only moments ago inspired a mixture of fear and awe in the highest-ranking admirals. The sergeant's warnings echoed in his mind. You don't want to know. Stay out of it. But Mason's instinct, fueled by adrenaline and an insatiable need to comprehend, pushed him forward. He rounded a corner and stumbled across a door left slightly ajar. A sliver of pale light spilled into the hallway, and a faint hum of computers and monitors drifted through the gap. Mason froze, his pulse quickening. This was a restricted area. He wasn't cleared, but he could see shadows moving inside, and through the crack, a soft glow reflected off Alina's hair as she leaned over a workstation. His curiosity overpowered caution. Mason edged closer, careful to remain unseen. Through the narrow opening, he saw her fingers move deftly across a keyboard, bringing up a monitor filled with streams of encrypted data, digital maps, and a profile marked Top Secret, Eyes Only. Mason's breath caught. His sergeant hadn't exaggerated. This was the kind of file that shouldn't exist outside the deepest levels of classified archives. His eyes widened as the system prompted him with a name, Alina Hartwell. He froze, almost unable to process what he was seeing. There was a photo, a formal portrait of her in full military regalia, adorned with medals he couldn't begin to identify. Next to it were lines of text, filled with codes, missions, and commendations that read like a war diary from a different reality. Mason could barely comprehend the scale. Missions deep inside hostile territories, operations conducted without official acknowledgement, and outcomes so critical they had altered the balance of national security. The file continued. Codename Archangel. Clearance level. Eyes Only, Presidential Directive 1642. Status, retired, per recommendation of the President of the United States. Operational impact, unspeakable. Mason felt his stomach twist. This wasn't just a soldier or a Marine. This was a weapon, a strategic asset of the highest order, someone whose very existence had been hidden from the public, from almost everyone in the military. And here she was, moving through the command center as if she owned it, because she did. A faint click behind him made Mason spin around. Alina Hartwell stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, dark and penetrating, locked onto his, and he felt as though she could see straight through him. His throat went dry. He opened his mouth to explain, but no words came. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice calm, almost detached, but threaded with a warning sharp enough to cut steel. I was just curious, Mason stammered. His mind raced. Why would she care if I saw a file about her, who even has access to this stuff? Alina's gaze didn't waver. Curiosity can be deadly, Corporal, and right now, you are in the middle of shadows you cannot even begin to understand. Mason swallowed hard. The weight of her presence pressed down on him. He had joked about her rank, he had dared to step into her domain, and now he felt exposed in ways he couldn't explain. She wasn't angry, not in the conventional sense. She was warning him, protecting him from his own ignorance in a way only someone who had stared death in the face countless times could. Then the loudspeaker system crackled, interrupting the tense silence. All command personnel to the war room now. Alina's eyes flicked to the monitors. A red blip on the digital map pulsed, sending a ripple through the system. She didn't hesitate. Without a word, she moved past Mason, stepping toward the source of the alarm with the calm authority of someone who had already lived through what was about to happen. Mason hesitated, torn between following and obeying the unspoken warning. The room was suddenly a storm of urgency, officers shouting, systems blinking, and the sirens outside still screaming. He felt like a trespasser in a world where every second counted, where lives hung in the balance, and where one wrong move could have catastrophic consequences. He followed, a step behind, trying to stay unnoticed. Alina led the Admirals through the corridors with a fluid precision, her movements a combination of confidence and instinct honed from years of operations no one spoke of aloud. Mason's mind reeled at the thought that someone so young-looking, so composed, could carry the weight of countless lives on her shoulders without breaking. Finally, they reached the war room. The doors opened to reveal a massive space, filled with officers, analysts, and communications personnel. Holographic maps floated in the center, showing the Pacific in layers of detail Mason had never seen before. Red and blue blips darted across the displays, some known, some unidentified. Alina approached the main console, tapping a series of keys that brought the most critical information to the forefront. "Vessels moving faster than predicted," she said, her voice measured but carrying a note of urgency. "Patterns match previous engagement, and the operatives involved have been anticipating this response." The admirals exchanged glances. Mason caught snippets of their conversation. "Retired. Her last operation. She swore she wouldn't return." Alina's eyes flicked to Mason. For a moment it seemed she was assessing him, weighing the risk he posed simply by being present. He swallowed, heart hammering, unsure if she was seeing through him or right through him. Then she turned back to the display. "Prepare a tactical team, full autonomy, immediate deployment, no delays. If conventional channels are compromised, we proceed independently." One admiral hesitated. "Ma'am, this goes against multiple protocols. "I know," Alina interrupted, "and that's why I'm here. There is no time for hesitation. Move." Mason felt the weight of her authority crush everything else in the room. This wasn't about rank on paper. It wasn't about medals or titles. It was about presence, skill, and the sheer force of someone who had survived operations so deadly, so secret, that no one dared question her judgment. As officers scrambled to carry out her orders, Mason's gaze returned to the terminal he had glimpsed. The Archangel file lingered in his mind, haunting him. The missions, the code name, the status marked. Understood, for the first time, that Alina Hartwell was more than a legend. She was an operative of unimaginable caliber, someone whose return to action signaled a threat so severe that only she could counter it. The sirens outside faded slightly, replaced by the constant buzz of activity inside the command center. Mason realized he was no longer just a bystander. He had entered a world of classified shadows, where every move was critical, every second counted, and where the line between life and death was razor-thin. And at the center of it all stood Alina Hartwell, the woman no one recognized but everyone respected, the operative whose presence alone could alter the course of an entire crisis. Mason understood one thing with absolute clarity. He was about to witness events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about authority, courage, and the unseen battles fought in the shadows. As she stepped past him, moving toward the war room proper, Mason felt a mixture of awe, fear, and an undeniable pull of curiosity. He knew he couldn't turn away, and he knew deep down that nothing in his life would ever be the same again. The war room hummed with tension, a chaotic symphony of voices, blinking screens, and the low rumble of servers working overtime. Mason Reed stood near the back, heart pounding, still trying to process everything he had just witnessed. Alina Hartwell moved like she owned the space, her every motion precise, decisive, and terrifyingly calm. The Admirals, normally so imposing and unshakable, deferred to her with a subtle respect that Mason could feel even from across the room. The situation was already dire. Red blips on the central holographic display flickered across the Pacific map, their paths unpredictable. Unidentified vessels, moving at extraordinary speeds, had entered restricted waters without authorization. Multiple alarms had gone off, yet conventional tracking systems failed to lock onto them consistently. Mason realized he was witnessing the precursor to a crisis that could spiral beyond anything the Navy had faced in decades. Alina leaned over the holographic map, tracing the trajectory of one of the vessels with her finger. "It's them," she said quietly, her voice calm but carrying the weight of history. The admirals exchanged uneasy glances. One whispered to another, "The ghost, it can't be." Mason's curiosity flared. The ghost. He had heard rumors of legendary operatives, stories whispered in mess halls about someone who could slip into enemy territory undetected, disrupt operations, and vanish without leaving a trace. He never imagined those tales might be true. And now, staring at Alina, he realized they were not just stories, they were warnings. An admiral, voice tight with unease, stepped forward. "Ma'am, you swore never to return to active operations. You retired for a reason. Why are you here?" Alina didn't flinch. She straightened, her eyes sharp, scanning the holographic displays. "I retired," she said evenly, "because I believed the threat was neutralized. I swore to myself that I would never return to this world until they came back." Mason's mind struggled to keep up. Who is she talking about? "They're a rogue maritime paramilitary unit," she continued. "Officially, they don't exist, but they've been operating under the radar for years, and now they're escalating." The room went silent. Even the young analysts who usually barked updates at lightning speed paused, sensing the gravity of the moment. Mason's pulse raced. He had seen conflicts in training simulations, had learned to read patterns on maps, had memorized protocols for every conceivable scenario. But this was beyond anything he had prepared for. Alina's fingers danced across the control panel, bringing up encrypted communications intercepted from the rogue vessels. "They know me," she said, almost under her breath. "They've been waiting for this moment." The words sent a chill down Mason's spine. They know her, and they've been waiting for her. An admiral stepped closer, his face pale. "Ma'am, if they know you, then the mission is." "Not optional," Alina interrupted, cutting him off with a steely gaze. "It has to be done, and I will not allow them to take more lives because of mistakes made years ago." Mason's chest tightened. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had survived operations that defied imagination, someone who had stared death in the face and walked away. And now, she was preparing to return to the very front lines. Suddenly, the holographic map highlighted a vessel moving faster than predicted. Alina's eyes narrowed. "They're testing us," she said, almost to herself. "They want to see how quickly we can respond. They want to measure our defenses." "Ma'am, what do we do?" an officer asked, voice trembling slightly. Alina straightened, her presence commanding the room. "We act fast. We strike before they realize we're here. Conventional channels will not suffice. We move independently without interference. The team is already assembled. Full authority has been granted. Execute immediately." Mason watched as officers scrambled to follow her orders. Everything moved faster than he could process. Helicopters were prepped, teams assembled, communication channels secured. Alina's eyes flicked to him for a brief second. "You're still here," Mason thought. Her gaze was assessing, weighing whether he could survive in this storm. A communications officer approached her with a tablet, showing the encrypted signals intercepted from the rogue vessels. Alina scanned the data, her expression unreadable. "This is coordinated," she said. "Precision strikes across multiple locations. They're not amateurs. They've studied our tactics, our response times, our weaknesses, and they've anticipated my return." Mason felt his stomach twist. The level of planning, the scale of operations, it was almost incomprehensible. And yet Alina was calm, almost serene, as if she had walked into this scenario countless times before. "Corporal," a voice called. Mason turned to see his sergeant rushing toward him, eyes wide with concern. "You need to stay here. This is not your fight. You have no clearance, no authority. Just stay alive." Mason nodded, though his curiosity burned. He wanted to be part of it, to understand how Alina operated, to see the full extent of her legendary skills in action. But even he knew he had to respect the warning. He wasn't prepared for what was coming. Alina stepped toward the edge of the holographic map, her eyes scanning the blips that represented hostile vessels. She spoke to the room, her voice calm but resolute. "We strike now. Precision, speed, and coordination. Any hesitation and they gain the upper hand. Move." Officers nodded and rushed to execute the orders. Helicopters roared to life, teams boarded vehicles, and communications buzzed with rapid updates. Mason could feel the tension in the room escalate with every passing second. Suddenly, a red warning blip appeared on the screen. A missile lock had been detected. Mason's eyes widened. Alina's fingers flew across the console, issuing commands. "Evade, take cover, deploy countermeasures." The room erupted in controlled chaos. Officers shouted, alarms blared, and Mason's heart raced. He had never experienced anything like this, not in training, not in simulations. And yet Alina remained the calm center of the storm, her authority absolute. "Ma'am," one of the admirals shouted, "you can't." "I can," she interrupted sharply. "We have no other choice. Prepare for immediate insertion. I move first. The team follows." Mason felt his stomach drop. She wasn't just leading from behind. She was going into the field herself. The woman who had inspired awe, fear, and respect was about to face the enemy directly. As the team readied themselves for deployment, Mason watched Alina issue final instructions, her focus unyielding. He realized then that the legends, the whispers, the stories of the ghost were true. She was not just a Marine, not just a commander. She was an operative of unmatched skill, experience, and resolve. The helicopters lifted off, carrying Alina and her team toward the unknown threat, their engines roaring over the Pacific. Mason felt a mixture of awe and fear as he watched them disappear into the distance. The stakes were impossibly high, and yet he knew that if anyone could handle it, it was her. And in that moment, Mason understood why the admirals had saluted her earlier that morning. Not because of rank, not because of protocol, but because she carried a weight and power that no one else could match. A presence forged in battles, survival, and missions no one dared speak of. Mason's eyes followed the helicopters until they were tiny specks in the sky. The war room buzzed with updates, but he felt a strange sense of calm amidst the chaos. He had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would change his understanding of courage, authority, and the unseen battles waged in the shadows. Alina Hartwell had returned, and the world was about to find out why they had feared her all along. The night air over the Pacific was thick with humidity and tension, carrying the distant hum of naval vessels and the sharper roar of helicopter blades slicing through the darkness. Mason Reed watched from the command center as Alina Hartwell and her team approached the coordinates of the rogue vessels. The red blips on the holographic map now represented real, tangible threats, machines of destruction that could alter the balance of power in the region. And Alina was leading the charge directly into the storm. Mason had followed her through the command center, not by official clearance but by a mixture of curiosity and a desperate need to witness the truth. He knew, deep down, that this was dangerous. He had seen classified files, observed the ghost at work, and understood the stakes. Yet being this close, seeing the meticulous preparation, hearing her voice issue commands that officers obeyed without question, made the reality almost surreal. The helicopters descended toward the rogue vessels' last known positions. Alina's team moved like shadows, silent and deliberate, each member aware of their roles down to the second. Mason felt his pulse spike as he imagined the chaos waiting for them. This wasn't training. This wasn't simulation. Lives, national security, and the outcome of months, perhaps years, of intelligence work hung in the balance. "Corporal Reed," a voice startled him. He turned to see his sergeant, face grim, leaning close. "This is your last warning. You stay here. You don't follow them onto that deck, onto that ship, or into combat. You are not prepared for what's coming." Mason swallowed hard, nodding, "Yes, sir." But his eyes never left the display tracking Alina's progress. Each red blip moved with precision and intent, yet Alina's team seemed always one step ahead, anticipating their moves. Mason realized the term ghost wasn't just a code name. It was a description of how Alina operated. She appeared where she needed to be, struck with surgical precision, and vanished again before anyone could counter. The first engagement began almost without warning. One of the rogue vessels fired upon an approaching target. The radar flickered, alarms blared, and officers shouted over the comms. Alina's voice cut through the chaos, calm but absolute. "Deploy countermeasures. Flank left. Maintain stealth protocols. Target neutralized only when confirmation is complete." Mason's heart pounded. He had never heard orders given with such clarity in the midst of chaos. The calmness, the authority, the absolute control she wielded, it was mesmerizing. Then a direct visual feed from the mission screen appeared. Alina moving across the deck of one of the vessels, crouched low, weapon ready. Mason felt his stomach drop. He had seen her in the command center issuing commands, but seeing her physically engaging with the threat was entirely different. She wasn't just leading the operation. She was inside it, controlling it from the front lines. Explosions rocked the distant vessels, sending plumes of fire and smoke into the night sky. Mason flinched as the monitors displayed flashes of gunfire, smoke, and shadows darting across metal decks. Alina's team moved with deadly coordination, neutralizing threats one by one. Her voice over the comms was steady, guiding them through the chaos with surgical precision. One of the rogue operatives tried to flank the team, slipping across a narrow deck. Alina anticipated it instantly. She fired once and the operative went down silently, no struggle, no hesitation. Mason felt a shiver crawl down his spine. She wasn't just skilled, she was precise, almost eerily so. Suddenly, a warning flashed on the tactical display. Multiple vessels converging on their position, faster than projected. The rogue unit had anticipated a response. Mason's heart pounded in his chest. He realized then just how high the stakes were. This was no mere skirmish. This was a calculated, coordinated strike, designed to test, bait, and possibly eliminate Alina and her team. "Adjust trajectory," Alina commanded over the comms. "Use decoys. Draw them into the trap. Maintain formation Delta 3. Confirm engagement only on my signal." Mason watched in disbelief as the team executed flawlessly. Every member moved in perfect synchrony, a choreography of combat honed by years of experience and countless missions no one knew about. Alina was the linchpin, the one whose presence orchestrated every movement, every strike, every countermeasure. Then came the moment Mason had feared. One of the rogue vessels fired directly at Alina's position. The helicopter feed showed a missile streaking toward the deck. Time seemed to slow. Mason's breath caught in his throat. Alina didn't flinch. She pressed a few keys, and the missile detonated harmlessly in the water, far from the team. "Good," she said calmly, almost to herself, as if acknowledging a minor annoyance rather than life-or-death danger. The team returned fire, neutralizing another wave of operatives. Mason watched, mesmerized and terrified, as Alina's leadership turned chaos into controlled execution. She was everywhere at once, assessing threats, directing actions, and moving with an agility and focus that seemed almost supernatural. A voice over the comms interrupted Mason's thoughts. "Ma'am, multiple contacts closing in from the northeast. They're attempting a coordinated maneuver." Alina's eyes narrowed. "I see them. Deploy countermeasures, Delta 3. Prepare boarding team. We intercept before they reach the civilians in the sector." Mason felt his stomach twist. Civilians. The rogue operatives were not just military threats, they were endangering innocent lives, and Alina's response was instantaneous, calculated, and ruthless. The boarding commenced. Alina's team moved across the metal decks like phantoms, taking down threats silently, efficiently. Mason's chest tightened as he saw her take point, her eyes scanning, her weapon poised, every movement precise. She was leading, striking, and commanding simultaneously, a one-woman force amplified by the coordination of her team. Explosions erupted nearby and Mason flinched again. He could feel the tremor through the floorboards displayed on the feed. But Alina remained composed, unwavering. Her authority was absolute, her focus unbroken. Every operator followed her instructions to the letter. Then came the moment Mason would never forget. One of the rogue leaders appeared, armed and dangerous, ready to counter Alina directly. The feed froze for a second as they confronted each other. Alina's movements were a blur, faster than Mason could track, neutralizing the threat before anyone else could react. The rogue leader collapsed silently, the danger eliminated in seconds. Mason's eyes widened. This was the ghost in action, the operative whose very existence had been whispered about, whose skill and precision had been feared. And now he was witnessing it firsthand. As the rogue vessels began to retreat, Alina's team secured the remaining threats, neutralizing every operative without a single casualty among their own. Mason realized that what he had seen was not just combat. It was orchestration, strategy, and execution on a level few could comprehend. The helicopters began their return, the night air filled with the sounds of rotors and distant explosions fatting. Mason watched Alina in the feed, her posture calm, almost serene, yet radiating a presence that left no room for doubt. She had controlled the situation entirely. Back at the command center, the tension in the room began to ease, but Mason could feel the gravity of what had just occurred pressing down on him. Alina Hartwell had returned from retirement, faced a calculated and dangerous threat, and executed her mission flawlessly. The legends were true. The ghost was real, and Mason knew with a clarity that left him both awed and terrified that her presence would change everything he had ever known about the military, authority, and courage. And as the helicopters disappeared into the darkness, Mason realized the stakes were far from over. The rogue vessels had been repelled, but Alina's return signaled that far greater challenges lay ahead. The adrenaline had barely faded when Alina Hartwell and her team returned to the command center, their movements precise, efficient, but weighted with the invisible scars of the mission. Mason Reed watched as officers carried out post-operation protocols, checking equipment, debriefing units, and securing sensitive information. But even amidst the apparent calm, a tension lingered, thicker than the humid Pacific night air outside. Alina walked through the war room with her usual precision, her eyes scanning the screens, noting data anomalies and issuing directives. Mason noticed the faint crease in her brow, the subtle tightness of her jaw, a shadow of weariness that only those who had faced impossible odds could carry. She had neutralized the rogue vessels, saved countless lives, and yet her focus remained razor-sharp. There was no celebration, no relief, only vigilance. Mason's sergeant approached him, face tight with concern. "Corporal, stay back, you've seen enough for now. These operations, they're not just dangerous, they're political, classified. You're not cleared and you don't want to be involved in what comes next." Mason nodded, though his curiosity burned hotter than ever. He had followed Alina this far, witnessed her in combat, and now he felt an irresistible pull to understand the deeper layers of her existence, her past, her missions, and the ghosts that still haunted her. He caught a glimpse of one of the admirals moving toward Alina, speaking in hushed tones. Mason strained to hear. "We thought we could trust everyone, but these leaks—" "I know," another replied. "We never anticipated someone would target her directly. We underestimated the stakes." Mason's mind reeled. Target her. The same woman who had just executed a flawless mission with 0 casualties had been the target of betrayal. The implications were staggering. Someone had known her capabilities, studied her tactics, and had waited for the right moment to strike. Alina turned, her eyes meeting Mason's for a fleeting second. It wasn't recognition this time, it was assessment. He felt her presence like a physical weight, her gaze measuring, calculating. For the briefest moment, he understood that she was aware of everything happening around her, including him. But she said nothing. Instead, she moved to the debriefing terminal, her fingers flying over the console. A classified file opened. Internal communications, strategic plans, and encrypted intelligence that Mason could barely comprehend. He watched as lines of text scrolled, revealing hidden threats, suspicious personnel, and potential saboteurs within their own ranks. A junior officer approached cautiously. "Ma'am, the intelligence indicates there may have been a breach in internal security. Someone fed them information about your operations, about the deployment. We're still tracing the source." Alina didn't flinch. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the information. "And the leak?" "We suspect," the officer hesitated, "someone within the command chain." Mason felt a chill crawl down his spine. A traitor. In the same room, among the people who had just executed orders under Alina's command. The idea was almost incomprehensible, yet every shred of evidence suggested it was true. Alina's lips pressed into a thin line. She leaned over the terminal, fingers tracing lines of code and communication logs. "I've been targeted before," she said quietly, almost to herself. "This isn't the first time someone has tried to manipulate operations from the inside, but it will be the last." Her words carried the weight of experience, of survival, of someone who had faced betrayal, sabotage, and calculated attempts to eliminate her long before anyone else even knew she existed. Mason's admiration deepened. This wasn't just skill or courage. This was a life forged in the crucible of unimaginable danger. The room fell silent as Alina began issuing directives for internal security. Officers were instructed to verify identities, trace communication logs, and monitor all personnel for signs of irregular activity. Every action was precise, methodical, and executed with an authority that left no room for error. Mason observed her closely. Each movement, each command, reinforced what he had already begun to understand. Alina Hartwell was not just a Marine, not just a strategist. She was a force unto herself, capable of countering threats both external and internal. Then a secure communication alert flashed on the terminal. Alina's expression tightened as she opened the message. Mason caught a few words: compromised, high-level extraction, immediate. Her eyes narrowed. "They know," she said, voice calm but deadly. "They know I've returned, and they know what I can do." The officers around her stiffened, sensing the gravity of the revelation. Mason felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The rogue vessels had been only the beginning. Now, Alina was facing a threat from within her own ranks, someone who had betrayed trust at the highest levels. One of the admirals stepped forward cautiously. "Ma'am, if this is internal." "I know," Elena interrupted sharply. "I've seen it before, and I will not allow it to happen again." Mason realized that the stakes had just escalated beyond his comprehension. This wasn't merely a tactical operation anymore. It was a war within the shadows, a battle for survival, trust, and control. And Elena was at the center of it. Her eyes scanned the room, calculating, assessing. She issued orders to secure sensitive areas, isolate personnel, and conduct thorough audits of all communications. Every action was preemptive, ensuring that no further leaks could compromise the operation. Then her gaze shifted to Mason. For a moment he felt exposed, measured, weighed. He understood that she could sense his presence, his curiosity, and perhaps even the temptation to intervene. But instead of admonishing him, she simply returned her attention to the task at hand. The room became a hive of controlled chaos, officers moving efficiently under her guidance. Mason watched, transfixed, as Elena orchestrated the operation with an almost supernatural clarity. Every potential threat was anticipated, every irregularity accounted for, every contingency addressed. And then came the moment that revealed just how deeply the betrayal ran. One of the encrypted files highlighted a series of communications between a high-ranking officer and an unknown external agent. Mason's eyes widened as he realized the implications. Someone within the Navy had intentionally provided intelligence to the rogue vessels, endangering lives and compromising missions. Elena's expression hardened. She turned to the admirals, voice low but commanding. "We have a mole, someone within the chain of command, and they've been waiting for this moment for years. We will find them, and when we do—" Her words hung in the air, a promise and a threat all at once. Mason felt the weight of her authority press down on him, understood that the ghost was not just a legend of combat prowess, but also a master of strategy, subterfuge, and retribution. As the command center continued its debrief and internal security protocols, Mason realized that he was witnessing more than just a military operation. He was witnessing the unmasking of betrayal, the confrontation with shadows from the past, and the execution of a plan so precise it bordered on supernatural. And through it all, Elena Hartwell remained at the center, calm, unyielding, unstoppable. The tension in the command center was electric. Every officer moved with deliberate precision, aware that the situation was no longer just a rogue operation. It was a war within the Navy itself. The revelation of an internal mole had shaken the foundation of trust, and everyone knew the consequences of failure could be catastrophic. Mason Reed stood at the back of the room, heart pounding, as Elena Hartwell assumed complete command. She was a force of nature, calm yet imposing, her presence demanding respect and obedience without a word. The intelligence team had traced the mole's communication patterns to a high-ranking officer stationed on a nearby vessel. The man's identity was classified, known only to a handful of admirals, but Elena didn't need clearance. Her reputation and skill cut through bureaucracy like a scalpel. She had already prepared a tactical strike, one that would neutralize the threat without endangering her team or civilian lives. "Prepare the insertion team," Elena commanded, her voice steady and authoritative. "We move within the hour. Extraction and containment are priority. The mole is our target, and we end this tonight." Mason's eyes widened. She was about to confront a traitor, someone who had endangered countless lives, and she was doing it herself. He had seen her in combat before, but this mission was personal. The stakes were higher than ever, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. The team boarded helicopters under the cover of darkness, each operative moving with precision, their trust in Elena absolute. Mason watched the feed, mesmerized. The night was alive with tension, each rotor blade slicing through the thick air as they approached the target vessel. Suddenly, the mission feed showed the rogue officer attempting to activate the ship's defenses. Mason held his breath. Alina's team responded instantly, deploying countermeasures and securing critical systems. The officer, realizing he was compromised, moved to escape only to find Alina already on deck, waiting. Her movements were almost unreal. She was a blur of speed and precision, neutralizing threats silently and efficiently. Mason's stomach tightened as he saw her confront the traitor directly. There was no hesitation, no second chance. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on him like a predator assessing prey. "You underestimated me," Alina said, voice low and deadly as the officer tried to resist. "And that was your mistake." In moments, the traitor was subdued, communication devices destroyed, and all sensitive intelligence secured. Mason felt a shiver run down his spine. The ghost had struck again, not in rumor, not in legend, but in reality. She had eliminated a threat that could have destabilized an entire operation, and she had done it flawlessly. The team regrouped, helicopters lifting off as the vessel returned to its normal course. Back in the command center, Mason saw the aftermath unfold. The officers, analysts, and admirals moved efficiently to restore order, guided by Alina's directives. She remained calm, almost serene, yet the weight of authority in her presence was palpable. One admiral stepped forward, voice tight with respect. "Ma'am, your actions tonight have saved lives and prevented what could have been a catastrophic breach. How do you do it?" Alina's gaze swept the room, her expression unreadable. Experience, preparation, and knowing when to act. Authority is not about rank on paper. It's about responsibility, skill, and the willingness to face danger head-on. Mason watched, captivated. He had entered the mission with curiosity and awe, but he now understood the depth of her legend. Alina Hartwell was not just a Marine. She was the embodiment of decisive action, strategic brilliance, and survival against impossible odds. The mole's capture was just the beginning. Alina immediately initiated an internal audit, ensuring that no further threats remained. She coordinated with the highest levels of command, neutralizing any potential leaks and securing sensitive intelligence. Mason realized that her return had restored balance, but it had also left a lasting impression on everyone present. Finally, as the chaos subsided, Alina turned to Mason. Her gaze lingered on him, assessing, understanding. "You've seen enough," she said, her tone calm but firm. "The rest, you leave to those trained to handle it." Mason nodded, swallowing hard. He had seen courage, authority, and precision beyond comprehension. He had witnessed the ghost in action, the operative who had saved countless lives, neutralized impossible threats, and confronted betrayal without hesitation. Alina's team debriefed and secured all materials, ensuring no trace of the operation remained outside authorized channels. Mason watched as she moved through the command center, issuing final directives and coordinating follow-ups. Even in victory, she exuded control, grace, and an almost tangible presence that commanded respect. Later, Mason found himself standing near the empty helipad, watching the night sky. The helicopters had returned to base, and the rogue threat had been neutralized. But he felt the weight of the events pressing down on him. He had been part of history, even if only as a witness. He had seen the ghost, and he knew the stories were true. His sergeant approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've seen something most people never will. Remember it, learn from it, and understand that not all heroes wear the badges you think they do." Mason nodded, heart still racing. He had learned more about courage, authority, and survival in a few hours than he had in years of training. And he knew one thing with certainty. Alina Hartwell's legend was real, and it would endure long after the operation was classified and buried. As he looked toward the command center, Mason saw Alina walking calmly through the room, her presence commanding, unshakable, unstoppable. She had faced external threats, internal betrayal, and impossible odds, and she had prevailed. The ghost had returned, and the Navy would never forget the power, precision, and authority she wielded. Mason realized that he would never see military operations the same way again. He had witnessed true heroism, the kind that existed in shadows, beyond rank and protocol, in moments that defined history. Alina Hartwell had not only saved the mission, but had reminded everyone present what it meant to embody courage, strategy, and unwavering authority. As dawn approached, the command center quieted, the immediate danger behind them but the lessons eternal. Mason stepped outside, taking a deep breath, letting the cool morning air wash over him. He thought about everything he had seen, the classified files, the rogue vessels, the mole, the flawless execution, and most of all, Alina Hartwell herself. She had returned from retirement, confronted danger, neutralized threats, and restored order. And in doing so, she had cemented her place as a legend, a ghost who moved unseen, struck decisively, and commanded respect without question. Mason smiled faintly, a mix of awe and humility washing over him. He had entered the mission with curiosity and left with understanding, forever changed by the force of nature that was Alina Hartwell. The world would never know the full story, but he had seen it, and that was enough. End of Part 8. The climax and resolution. The mole is neutralized, Alina's legendary status solidified, and Mason's understanding of courage, authority, and heroism reaches its peak.